Good morning, IT Nation. Appreciate you guys taking the time. 4 quick thank yous before we get started. Thank you, number 1, to ConnectWise for inviting me to be at the conference, and also for always taking my phone calls, no matter what the day or what the hour, or even on weekends. So I really appreciate it, and I mean that sincerely. Thank you, number 2, goes to my business partner, Amy Katz. She's out here somewhere, I think. 21 years I've known Amy, and I'm not a journalist in media without Amy as a business builder and a best friend. So thank you, number 2, goes to Amy. Thank you, number 3, goes to all of you, as well as our sponsors on the sites, I should say now. We got the 2 of them growing like crazy. So just that thank you, what I mean by that is the sites have grown every year, double-digit, quarter over quarter for multiple years now. So thank you so much to the readers who know us. To those who don't know us yet, feel free to reach out to me. The final thank you goes to someone that I fail to thank you every year, and that's my parents and my wife and my kids. They made my life really easy. Like, I've got the easiest life I know of. So that's it for the thank yous. Could I please get a round of applause for each of those 4 categories? Thank you for everyone. I shouldn't say categories, for those 4 incredible influencers in my life, so thank you very much. This panel, very interesting group of folks that we'll bring up in a second, and I think the big question is, what could these 5 individuals possibly have in common with every one of you in the audience? And the answer is quite easy. You know, whether you're talking about IT in the 1980s, the 1990s, present day, it really doesn't matter, because all of you in the audience and all of our panel members have basically overcome these 3 challenges over and over. And those challenges are the launch stage, all the pain of launching and building a business, and also the opportunities that come with it. The pivot. You guys know how to pivot, but you're going to continually pivot again, and you need to know where and when to make those pivots. So launch, pivot, and then finally exit. You are all going to exit. And let me clarify what that means. That doesn't mean you are all going to sell your businesses. Many of you will, but at some point, you will not be involved in your business. So the question is, how do you go on that journey? Launch, pivot, exit, do it very successfully. What we're going to do is bring up our panelists in just 1 second to discuss that, but I wanted to remind you, as we get into the panel and we get going with the conversation, we'll talk some inside baseball about the history of the industry and how we got to this point, but we want to invite you to find the microphone and ask questions and jump on in. Give us about 10 minutes to get the questions going, 15 minutes, and then we'll invite you to grab a microphone. But without further ado, let's bring up our panelists, and then we'll do some intros. Good morning, Michael.
Thank you.
Arlen, good to see you. Glory, great to see you. Gerald, great to see you. Arnie, thank you for having me. I was going to sit, but I think I'll stand for a little bit. I got to get my legs under me. What could these 5 people have in common? Let me set the stage first, and then I'll ask some questions. The stage is this. You've got Lori and you've got Arlen from the IT service provider, solution provider side of the house. And if you think about IT Nation and all of you here, there were some humble beginnings to this. And the humble beginnings and the spark of innovation and the spark of conversation go back to Ingram Micro VTN, some of the peer groups that happened there. Then there was a next rev where Arnie and Arlen met, and they started talking about peer groups and doing peer groups, et cetera, and that was a rev. And then we had another rev where Gerald and Arlen, Gerald and Arnie get together and start talking about, do these things ever come together in terms of what we're working on software? And then we have Michael enter the scene at about 2011 and basically take over a plane in mid-flight that needed to be rebuilt in mid-flight and move that plane forward. And then but what I want to do is start present day and then rewind to the history of this industry and then get our crowd involved. So I think the present day question, the elephant in the room, was that the deal announced yesterday. Although you've addressed it, you've spoken with the media, I did want a quick soundbite from both Arnie and Michael in terms of why now? ConnectWise Continuum, essentially Continuum merging into ConnectWise. ConnectWise is the flagship. Why now? Arnie?
The time is right. When you look at all of you, you're in various levels of maturity, right? And so what we saw with Continuum was they do such a great job with getting people started in the managed service space. They've done such a great job and really focusing on cybersecurity. And so they've really advanced the field in that area. We want to make sure that all entrepreneurs, all people in this industry have an opportunity. And so even the smallest of companies, to be able to outsource the managed service function, to be able to outsource security. And now we're talking about large VARs. Large VARs have got to get into managed services. And so this is a great way, by adding Continuum and their beautiful portfolio of products and services, it's a way that we can take care of the entire ecosystem from startup all the way through to exit, to your point.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, your vantage point?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And there's a lot of misnomers about what Continuum is. Many people think of us as a master MSP, if you will, and oftentimes think of it as almost being competitive with the market. But we are channel exclusive. We only license our products through MSPs. And one of the things that we've spent, in particular the last 4 or 5 years on, is building a level of automation using artificial intelligence, some AI ML being introduced in particular in this year. And what we've done is created a level of autonomic computing so that, rather than having humans, remediate computers, what better thing than to use computers to repair computers? For a lot of the if you look, most of our environments are Windows today. And so, all the problems, the alerts, and everything that happens across these systems, there's so much fact pattern in it. Why not use technology to go do that? And so, to Arnie's point, ConnectWise has been on this amazing journey, and appropriately even renaming their product Automate, because this is about trying to create and introduce as much automation as possible. And at the very onset of this industry, the introduction of remote monitoring and management, those were really productivity tools designed to help increase the worker productivity. And if you can now then just start to automate a number of the alerting and the noise that comes out of these systems and reduce it down, and then have a knock and a SOC and a help desk behind it, to remediate whatever's left, all the better. And so, with this incredible position in PSA, and surprisingly far more complementary products than competitive, even in the RMM space. And as you get to understand what the combination is going to bring to this market, you'll much more clearly understand the delineation between the RMM tools that ConnectWise has brought to the market and the tools that we brought to the market. I think they're very much more of a natural fit than people assume.
Well, thank you both. I appreciate the background, and thank you for taking my calls, to say the least. Let me also put some context here. What I want to do first is talk a little bit about the history of the software in this market, and then where the service providers has played and the solutions providers have played in terms of unlocking the value of that software, building businesses, serving both your employees, taking your valuations up, et cetera, serving your customers as well. But Arnie, you've described this industry to me as the NFL. There have been some heated moments, to say the least, between what I would call, going back a few years, what I would call the Tampa team, the Miami team, and maybe the Albany team, and now you got a Connecticut team. So you got these franchises that occasionally feud. But you also always told me, you know what, game day we beat each other up, but when it's not game day, it's about building the league and building it better. Can you tell me a little bit about how you and Gerald first met? Now, Gerald, you are the man behind Kaseya, you and two co-founders. Tell us a little bit about the first year of Kaseya, the first year of ConnectWise, and then that meeting. Gerald, did you want to go first maybe and tell us a little bit about Kaseya?
Sure, absolutely. Arnie didn't know who I was, but I called him up anyway. I happened to be based out of Sarasota at the time, and of course, ConnectWise is Tampa-based. And I'm going to the airport flying to California. So I think time we had a meeting. He sort of looks at me and thinks I'm a little bit crazy coming to talk to him. But we sat down and we talked about it. And we talked a little bit about where the industry is going. And one thing led to another. We got involved in the same groups like True Profit. And ultimately, we sat down. Actually, we had, I think, a meeting in Tampa Airport, one of the meetings.
We did.
Where we talked about joining the two businesses. And ultimately, we probably should have worked harder at it, but I don't think the industry was mature enough at that point for that to happen. So it's been a great run over the years. We've had, as you say, Joe, we've had our skirmishes here and there, but
Really?
it's all been good. The industry has grown. Look at it.
Arnie, first impression? Let me tell you what I heard from you first, and then I want your vantage point on it.
All right.
Separate phone calls. Arnie calls me. This is when I first got into the industry, and he says, there's this thing called PSA. And oh, by the way, you may hear about one day this thing called RMM. It plugs into PSA, but it's about PSA. And then Gerald called the day later, and he said, there's this thing called RMM. And by the way, you may have this PSA thing that plugs in one day. And so the conversation was born. What was your first impression of Gerald and the industry?
Well, I was very impressed with Gerald because what they had done with Kaseya was revolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember back at the time, everyone else was sort of dorking around with trying to create a probe, right?
Right.
And it was like, oh, let's have a probe and let's have that thing go out on the network and try and figure everything out. And that did not work. And these guys were brilliant. They actually created the agent on the desktop, which is now the standard, right? No one even thinks about trying to do this with a probe anymore. So I knew he had the right technology. The only issue was, and I thought he was brilliant, he came to me, he gave me a lot of ideas on what to do to grow the business, because Gerald's been there and done that, right? By the time I'm talking to him, he's already had major success with Platinum, so I'm listening to every word that he says. I think you're right, though. It was just too early to put the companies together. And then the other reason was, I knew my company was only worth a couple million, and you were saying that your company is worth 150 million. So if we put them together, then here's how it would work out, the split. So that
I was just waiting for your 250 million.
So you go on this journey. You guys knew from early on that this industry would converge. Meanwhile, you got the service providers. Hey, tools are wonderful. Automation is wonderful. But you got to build businesses. The one thing that a lot of attendees here have in common is that $4 million to $6 million annual revenue barrier. Arlen, you went through it with your business. Laura, you've had an incredibly successful exit, and you somehow broke through that barrier as well. I think the secret to breakthrough, one of them was that initial peer group spark. Now, ironically, it didn't start here. Where did it start between you two?
Well, Arlen and I first met through the Ingram Micro Venture Tech Network. And the reason I became a part of that community was because I think, like many of yourselves, we knew our customers had needs. We knew the technology existed to serve them. But what did success look like? What was the right model? What was the right approach that enabled us to serve our customers, our employees, our community, and an industry in a way that we'd all be proud?
Right.
So I want to congratulate IT Nation on your 15th year anniversary, because I celebrate that sense of community. And that is how Arlen and I first met, and I know many of you have met each other, and I met many of you last night. Boy, it sure feels good. I feel like I'm home with my peers, because I don't know of when I first met Arlen and we were talking about what was possible, and we shared our Midwest values and our Midwest roots. We never really talked about ourselves. It was how we could elevate ideas and people and organizations. And I think that is a hallmark of the community spirit that we were able to share together.
Yeah, back in those early days, there wasn't really a voice for the partner. And community had to come together to begin to put that voice together, to figure out best practices, and to really change the dynamic to helping get everybody on the page looking towards success together. And community has been a big part of my life ever since, and that's where peer groups flowed out of, and it's still, to me, the driving force in this industry and what makes us unique.
Fantastic. We have a little bit of background now. I think the audience understands past, present, future. Well, maybe not future yet. We'll get to future, but past and present. I do want to make sure that we open up the conversation to questions. If you do have a question, microphone right here, and then I think there's microphones set up. I can't see very well, but if you step up to the microphone, feel free to ask the question. We'll make sure we'll work it in. And actually, here's our first. No, that's a camera, Joe, not a question. Good job, moderator. If there are questions, jump in. But I do want to talk about, there's the birth, and then there's the education, but then there's pivot, 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 pivot. I mean, Michael, like it's almost the day you were born as a company, it was like you were pivoting in midair multiple times. A lot of people think private equity day one with a technology company must be easy. Not so easy.
Well, I don't know how many people know or remember the Zenith story, but they were at the time, and Arnie, you know, you can attest to the fact that they did invent some pretty incredible things with great foresight, but their execution not so good. And we acquired the RMM assets from Zenith in September of 2011, and the folks that we bought it from turned out to be pretty bad characters. And so, you know, we did step into some things that we did not anticipate, but that comes with the job and the territory, I think, for any CEO at some level. But this one was sort of heading toward planet Earth at terminal velocity and was going to leave a smoking hole in the ground pretty quickly. And I called on the likes of people like Arlen for some good guidance and some thoughts about how we might steer this ship out of that trajectory. And frankly, you know, we never lost sight of the company just, you know, as you all recall, it for all intents and purposes, it shouldn't even exist today at some level. And yet, you know, the team of people that we first brought into it, and many of whom are still with us today, we never lost sight of the underlying value of what we had, the strategic values that the company brought, and just sort of went on that 20-mile march and just found our way, you know, through it. And you know, every company has to pivot. If you don't move and if you don't change, and the ones that are really successful are the ones that move and change ahead of the curve, not behind the curve. And again, for us, it was a clarifying moment. You know, in the words of Oscar Wilde, nothing focuses the mind like the sight of the gallows. And we were headed, you know, to that place. And so it was frankly quite galvanizing for us. And so the pivots that we made were self-evident.
Well, let's talk about pivots for a minute. Were there any pivots, anyone on the panel, that you made that almost killed you, or any pivots that you didn't make that almost killed you? Arnie, any pivots where you're like, oof, why did we do this? Or oof, we should have done this sooner?
Really? I got to answer that? Okay.
What was the most dramatic pivot?
You know, I mean, I actually, for me, I don't think there was a dramatic pivot. I think probably there were dramatic moments and dramatic realizations that then I had to work towards.
Right.
And I think probably one of those was actually going back to that first conversation that Gerald and I had, because he was right. We needed to put the companies together, or an RMM and a PSA needed to be together. And I never lost sight of that, and that always stuck in my head. As Gerald mentions, we were meeting 2-3 times talking about potentially putting the company together, and then all of a sudden, here comes this company, LabTech. And so because that was planted in my mind, that was the big pivot for me. Was, wow, are we gonna invest in this? Are we gonna commit to this? Are we gonna bring these things together? Is it the right time to do this? Can I afford to do this? And so we got pretty clever with how we did our acquisitions at ConnectWise. And we did. We required lab tech. That was a big pivot for us because it changed the industry, right? All of a sudden, we were all in our own lanes, and that was cool. And now all of a sudden, here we were sort of bringing more to the table under one roof. And so we had to overcome that. That was a big pivot for us.
Fantastic. And, Gerald, one of the key points you made in the back room, I want to raise it again with you, and then we'll bring in our service providers for their perspective, was sometimes that pivot involves the business barrier a lot for our attendees. That $4 million to $6 million MSP, they hit a wall. Arlen, I know you hit it. Lori, I know you had business challenges along the way, but Gerald, you were talking about, not only is it the $4 million to $6 million barrier, it's usually around that 40-person barrier where it's like, do I go or don't I go? What was your go, no-go decision in terms of scaling beyond 40 people and then the challenges around that time?
Well, I think the biggest challenge for any business that's growing, doesn't matter what industry it's in, and in fact, when I grew up through the Platinum Software years, most of our channel were in that category, 30, 40 employees. Very few of those organizations ever grew beyond that. A lot of them were franchised, which kept them in a container of 40 people, and that worked out really, really quite well. After you get above 40, you're in that different zone. You can't touch everything that goes on in the business. You need a trusted partner. You need good people in place that can run those parts of the business you can no longer touch. And many of us who are in the entrepreneurial world really have a difficult time pulling our wings in and letting the business fly.
Lori, from your vantage point, I would suspect a lot of the attendees don't realize just how far you did scale your business before you exited. Tell us a little bit about how far you did scale it, how you scaled it, and then Arlen, I want to come to you and talk a little bit about the $4 million to $6 million barrier and how you broke through it with your business. But Lori, tell us about scaling.
So scale is a result of opportunity. So when we grew our business, we never thought about how big do we want to be. We looked at the size of the opportunity. And like you said today, Arnie, this is the time. Well, when we started in the technology industry, technology services were optional. Today, it's no longer an option. So, I celebrate that what we saw as a vision, all of us, many of you in the room, that we really worked hard to create an industry together. And I truly believed from day one that I wanted to build something that would last past my presence of a founder. So personally, I parked my caution. I parked my risk management and said, we need to be bold in a way that delivers value to everyone in this ecosystem. And I know many of you can relate to that because personally, we might be a little bit more risk averse. But when it comes to a business that's starting with 3 or 4, and we all know that we served any role it took to serve those clients and to meet with the vendors and see the opportunities and make those decisions. I kept hoping we'd get to a comfort zone. Well, I don't know if I even need to say a word further. It's not about being in your comfort zone. It's about building something that you're proud of in a way that honors all those you serve. So when I would go out and call on customers, they told us what their needs were. Any business based on that is going to succeed. So as far as scaling, I became a student of growth strategies. And I knew that we had to have 2 simultaneous growth strategies so that we were balancing out the peaks and valleys, because there were a lot of both of those. And then we bought companies that went far out ahead of the curve in managed services. But they would struggle because they didn't have the hardware mix. So we would try to purchase in very small, so we could afford it, the thought leadership of early adopters and incorporate that into our very basics of the business. So in a nutshell, it wasn't 4, it wasn't 6. We ended up with offices in 3 markets, 150 employees, 80 million in revenues. But I can tell you that wasn't a big deal. it was still those same basics of listening and learning along the way, and then being bold and finding a capital stream to support it, but making sure that we weren't going to miss these opportunities. And so I think scale comes naturally in that model. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, it not only answers it, it begs the next question. You brought up the fact that you really thought about, let's define success. What does success mean? One of the things I worry about in this market, I think it's getting better, but one of the things I worry about in this market was success to a lot of MSPs and IT service providers is grow revenue, grow revenue, grow revenue, versus are you looking at your profits? Oh, and I think early in your journey, you had the profit issue. You finally solved that one, and then later in your journey, you were hitting the $4 to $6 million wall. Tell me about both pieces of that journey.
Yeah, so I grew up a farmer and started my career as a farmer. And every farmer I know has basically one goal. At the end of the year, you work your profit down to as close to zero as possible and find a way to not have to pay tax. And that's just the mindset that farmers tend to have. And I ran my IT company that way.
Right.
I would work all year to make money so I could spend it all before the end of the year. And
how was your valuation at that point?
well, see, that's the key, right? And while a lot of people in this room maybe aren't intentionally doing that, a lot of people in this room are not focused on profit.
Right.
And you know, your point earlier that we're all going to exit, that's very, very true.
Yeah.
And profit is a key part of a successful exit. But we did manage to grow in spite of myself and got to that $4 million mark in 98, and we were stuck for 5 years. And I was completely beside myself about that. And so that's when we decided we were going to do the M&A thing. And when I went to the bank that first time and asked for money,
Right.
he laughed at me. He literally laughed at me and said, "Did you look at your balance sheet before you came in here? You have successfully ran this company for almost 20 years without any profit that I can see anywhere." And of course, I had my long list of reasons why. He really didn't care, you know? So I had to fix that and begin to do the mind shift of it's not illegal to make profit in this business.
Right.
And we're not taking advantage of our customers if we create a successful, profitable business. And that's really important as people begin to think about exit because that determines what that future is going to look like.
Got it, got it. So I have another two-part question. It's coming to Arnie and Gerald, then I'm jumping to Michael. The part one of the question is, as you begin to get into the managed services provider market as a partner base, did you ever look at it and be like, well, these guys just aren't profitable enough. Should I even be in this market, or should I step away from it, or do I nurture it? And then part two of the question for you, Michael, will be something along the lines of, not only do you have to go out and help your partners with that, you're fixing the house, you know, and then the back tool shed at the same time and scaling that. So give that some thought for a question. But from your vantage point, was there any hesitation once you got into this market in terms of, maybe I made the wrong commitment here? Gerald?
I'm going to go first.
Well, there's no hesitation, really.
Okay.
I mean, if you're going to build a business, you need your infrastructure, which is your partners, your stakeholders, all to be engaged in the whole process. And if you have a view of what the industry should look like in the long run, you have got to get that vision out to the world that you live in, help people overcome their original biases as to what their businesses are, and help them with the vision of where to go in the future. So you have no choice but to be engaged.
But that early vision was, let's get these MSPs to recurring revenue and predictable. Cloud, it existed at the time, but it wasn't mainstream. Subscription services are not mainstream. Some of the early partners must have looked at you like you were from Mars.
But I think the process of moving to recurring revenues was one that was a difficult one early on. Maybe Arnie can address this better than I can, but when I came in this industry, everybody was using SneakerNet.
Yeah.
And at the end, they're trying to figure out, you know, what bill is a real bill. Their customers are trying to figure out, what am I getting screwed for? Everybody's not on the same page at all. And I viewed the industry as should have been more set up like an insurance business where you pay me, I put the resources in place to help you do what you need to do, And then it becomes a virtuous circle. The customer then is also receiving money, giving money to the provider on a monthly basis. So everybody is doing what they should be doing, and that is taking care of the IT assets for their customers, period.
Gotcha. And then, Arnie, was there a similar brainstorm going on at Tampa at that time in terms of how this is going to go?
Yeah, well, we knew, I knew, I'm a CPA, right? So for me, I kind of look at the world from a CPA lens. And, that's a very important professional service organization that every small business needs. Every small business has an accountant. Every small business has some external lawyer. And to me, the day that the PC hit the market, to me, it was like obvious that at some point, every small business would also have a technology solution provider, someone that would take care of their technology, because it was obvious that this was just going to go great gangbusters. So for me, it was just, let's jump in, let's invest, let's create a community, let's get this party started, because I knew that this would be the next great professional service, and it is. What I didn't see coming was reoccurring revenue. So that was the big, and when we jumped in, it was all time and material, and that was the real interesting genesis or metamorphosis to watch it go from time and material to reoccurring revenue. Really what Gerald's saying is like it should be an insurance policy and you should pay me every month for it. And so that's been the big interesting thing. But no, I always knew this would be huge, and it's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it will never change either, by the way. You will always be in the driver's seat. You will always be taking care of small to mid-sized business. Small to mid-sized business wants to do business with small to mid-sized business companies like you, right? So you'll always be there. And so this is a forever more industry.
Yeah, I'm often asked, is the MSP era fading or over? People just freak out about shifts, and I always say not at all. It's about your service catalog evolving. You may not be delivering the same set of services long term. It's going to evolve. Michael, so you arrive on the scene in 2011, give or take. As we've said, the assets needed some improvement. By 2012 or so, as I recall, you were hitting your stride. Things were starting to go well. You had really gotten the plane at a good altitude, going in the right direction. But to do that, you were both focusing internally, but also you were on the road constantly, meeting with folks like Arlen. How did you balance that? And were you ever worried, like, okay, I'm fixing the business, but I'm out listening to these service providers who, they've got challenging businesses as well. Were you confident the whole flight?
I don't know if I would use the word confident, Joe, but we were clear. We really focused on, and when I say we, remember, it wasn't just me, right? There were a number of other people that were in those trenches with me at that time, and I want to be clear about that. This does take a team of people who can get aligned around what the vision is and what the priorities are. We first really invoked the discipline of no, paying attention to the things that we were not going to do. So as you said before, we had the house to fix that was burning down and a future to build, and how do you balance that? And one of the hard decisions to make isn't the things you're going to do, but the things you're not going to do anymore, number one. And the other thing is that I think it's a common mistake. A lot of companies take and put their best resources on their biggest problems, particularly when you're in the solutions business. And I've always believed that it's important to take your best resources and put them on your greatest opportunities. And so we had the ability to start shedding that burning house as opposed to worrying about everything. We just paid attention not to doing everything, but to make sure that the few things we chose to do, we would do well, we would do with excellence, and that would really drive us out, knowing we were going to leave part of a burning house down behind us.
Yeah. And just to be clear, just so people don't think there's still smoke or fire in that house, to clarify, 2011 was the initial deal at Summit Partners, stabilize the business, grow the business. What year is it that Thoma Bravo acquired the business?
In June of 2017.
June of 2017, things continue to grow. Fast forward present day, things are in nice shape, companies coming together, yada, 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 here we are. So thank you for that background. Lori, as you listen to all this, were you ever skeptical as vendors came to you and said, the market's going to shift, you need to do this as a business? Or were you the one saying, no, 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 I'm going here, you need to go my direction?
I think the answer to that is we accepted that there wasn't a certainty of what would be the right path. But we knew there was a greater certainty of success if we were not ambiguous and unclear in any way about where we were going to focus.
Right.
So we engaged a very enlightened board of directors to proactively talk through those areas of focus that we chose to be expert at, along with all of our employees and input from customers. And so we didn't spend a lot of time, I would say, on the fringes or listening to noise. We tried to partner with others. We were always, who else can join us to bring a more holistic solution forward? And I see that wonderful collaboration here demonstrated at a phenomenal level. But that spirit of we don't have to be expert at everything really helped us. And then I would say the other piece of making decisions, you know, it was all about goodwill. So if Cisco had a new program like Voice over IP that we wanted to be early adopters, then we had to say no to our friends at Microsoft about something else, and to be very transparent so that we had trust. And I think building that trust into all these areas allowed us to say, we missed this, can we come on now kind of thing. But really having those very specific and intentional conversations about where we would focus with the information we had. And I would have to say that a board helped us because these leaders were used to making decisions with all the information, and that was a little bit new for us. So it became a pattern. We know with our culture and values that we're going to make the best decisions with the information we have and then remain flexible.
Right.
So that combination, we definitely were very specific in the areas we focused on and partnered for the rest in order to bring the whole solution to the clients.
And just refresh my memory very quickly, how many acquisitions or how did you expand the business?
5 ins and outs.
Okay.
So we purchased or sold part of our shares, and I think everybody here knows flexibility is key. Don't be afraid to call a red flag up until the minute of the signing, and that every deal is different.
Every deal is different. Everyone on the panel has been through them. Everyone's witnessed them. Arlen, from your vantage point, how many deals did you personally go through with your business? And then those experiences, that journey, is it the same journey our attendees are having, or is it completely different these days?
No, it's the same journey. You just never know.
Okay.
We did 10 deals during the HTS years, and you know, it was a critical way to grow the business, especially in our rural market space. But I want to go back to the question about managed services for just a minute.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the adoption. The first recollection I have of the discussion of moving to a flat fee service happened at a peer group meeting. We just had one peer group at the time, back in 2004. And we met actually in Madison.
Yes.
And I can remember partners sitting around that table saying, I will never, ever do services at a fixed rate because I know I'm going to lose my shirt. And some of those folks aren't with us today because of that decision probably, but
what made you a believer? I mean,
I was skeptical,
Yeah.
no question, but what drove me was community and the fact that peers were available to have the conversation, and you didn't have to make every mistake on your own. And so you could learn by watching what people were trying. And you know, we've gone through multiple business transformations over the year, from when we could sell product at 45 points to adding some services, to going with some proactive services, to getting to managed services, and now cloud and everything else. We have to stay nimble. We have to adapt and move our business. And so, you know, to me, M&A was a way to expand our customer base so we could deliver whatever was the relevant service at the time to enable our growth to happen. Organic growth in our market was just too slow for me, so that's where M&A made sense.
You know, M&A is interesting because, so we launched Channel E to E in 2015, 2016, I forget. It's been a journey. But we looked at the demographics, first of all. We knew the age of owners, and we were like, okay, something's going to give here. We knew cloud was also going to drive some things. And we just knew that we saw all the data, and we knew M&A would accelerate at least through 2022. So hence, Channel E to E, Entrepreneur Exit was born. But I also want to take a step back and not hype M&A. And what I mean by that is everyone is going to exit. It may not involve a merger or an acquisition. And with that vantage point in mind, I'm wondering if you think, Arlen, the attendees here are well aware enough of the increasing the valuation journey even before they get to the M&A conversation.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest mistakes that we see in the market watching the 600 or so companies we work with and evolve is there's not enough pre-planning and thinking about getting ready for M&A. It's a journey to get ready. You need 3 to 5 years to really put your house in order and prepare. And the first step of that process, in my mind, is to know what the number is you're working to get at time of exit. What do you need from a personal perspective to support the lifestyle you want to live after you don't get a paycheck anymore? And then what's the business need to be worth to really get you that number? Because I can tell you, when they write a check from a buyer, that's not what goes in your checking account.
Right.
Right? By the time you pay taxes, and if you have a partner, and if you have all the legal and other resource fees, I mean, it goes down pretty fast. And if you're not prepared by having the right target, you're going to come up short. You know, the most frustrating calls I get come from partners who say, you know, I need a job. I ran my business for 30 years. I sold my company. I didn't get enough to live on. I need a job. Where do I go get a job now? I've been the boss the whole time.
Yeah.
You know, I'm fortunate. I got a boss first time that was a good one. But, you know, after 42 years, looking for a boss is a different perspective. So you got to plan ahead.
Yeah.
And that's where I think most partners, they just expect that at the end of the rainbow, there's going to be this pot of gold. And the pot of gold is either not there or certainly not big enough.
Yeah. So on the one hand, our attendees are focused on that pot of gold. On the other hand, they're hearing and seeing all this chatter about private equity in this market. And sometimes the media, including myself, is guilty of saying, of almost presenting it as this is something new or different. Well, private equity's been around forever. Gerald, let's rewind, and I want to sort of rewind the clock and talk a little bit about your previous business before Kaseya, and sort of what you were thinking what was the private equity role in that era, and did you ever look at it as a potential opportunity for the business, or did you go another route?
I think there's always been one way or another of bringing in the resources that I already talked about earlier so that you can do acquisitions or you can grow your business quicker. Back in the 80s, when we were growing Platinum Software, there was venture capital. Now, venture capital has morphed into private equity.
What do you mean by that, just to
What is
clarify?
the difference? Well, venture capital was available where you could take $2 million or you could take $1 million. That's sort of the role an angel investor would play today. You tended to get more professionals that were involved in the venture capital industry. So you would get a focus on what's the exit for them. And that became the negative part about taking on money from anyone from the outside that's in the professional, institutional business of giving money to get money back as quickly as possible. And in the 80s and into the 90s, the only real option was either to sell to a corporation or to take your company public. And many of the advisors in and around that industry were focused on public because public earns them all more money. What you always have to think about is, as you're going through that process of thinking about how do I raise the kind of money I need in order to fulfill my goals, whether it be for the growth of the business or for your exit, is to understand what chains will be on you after you go through that process, and whether or not you are educated and prepared enough to make that transition. Mm-hmm. And it is a big transition. That's why you very rarely see companies go public today that are sub 100 million. They're all unicorns. They're all $1 billion plus. And it's just too hard for small companies to go through that process. So now private equity plays a big role, fills in where the public markets used to fill in, and the venture capital side has all somewhat gone away, and it's now replaced by angel investors.
Right, right. So just taking that private equity conversation forward, Michael, 2011 was the first private equity deal. A few years later was the second with Thoma Bravo. And then, Arnie, you're holding out. You're watching all this. You're thinking maybe, I don't know what you're thinking, actually. But from Michael's vantage point, when did you know you were going to jump in with the private equity team? And this was, and what did that mean for your partners in terms of you were partner focused, not, nickel and dime spreadsheet focused for the company, so to speak?
The entry of the private equity world is perhaps one of the best pieces of news that this entire industry could have ever received. These are companies, if you look at Thoma Bravo, for instance, their current fund that they invested in Arnie's company and now collectively ours is a $12.6 billion fund. And when you have companies that are that smart, that look at macroeconomics, that know how to look around corners and to predict trends, and put that kind of money to work in this industry, you need to know just how fortunate we all are, because they don't do things that are not going to pan out in extraordinary ways. They just can't. They have a fiduciary responsibility for their limited partners. And Thoma Bravo, by the way, now for 3 years in a row, has produced the greatest returns and is the most successful private equity tech investor on the planet. This is great news because, again, they don't do things that are small, and they do things that have the ability to look around corners and, again, predict how this is all going to go shake out. And so, yes, Summit was the first to enter. They continue to have investments in the category, and so does Vista and Insight and some others. But this was the best news that you could have ever received. Now, I know it was a little intimidating if it's not well understood, and we don't exactly know what that's going to mean. But for all the things that you've ever asked or demanded of Gerald or Arnie or of us, like, hey, can you speed up your roadmap? Can you put more resources here? Can you change your partner again? That's what that money enables us to do, is to go and accelerate all the things that you've been asking for, and to create the kinds of combinations now that ConnectWise and Continuum is, to help make the, simplification of choice, unification of platform, and all of that possible. Because otherwise, organically, it just takes too long. And this is going to be a major catalyst, an absolute accelerant to success for people that, saddle up into these platforms and leverage them.
Got it. Thank you, Michael. We have a question over here, and then Arnie, I want your closing thoughts on where this is all going and the background on PE. But yes, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Brian Motch, BMC Networks. I have a question for the panel from the perspective of a technology service provider. And I first want to quickly echo Laurie's comments about the sense of community and being part of bigger something than ourselves. And I want to applaud Arlen and Arnie's efforts to foster that in their organizations as they've grown. Gerald and Michael might have done the same, I just wasn't part of it. So from our perspective, I think many of us see ConnectWise as tools and Continuum as tools plus labor. So I think a lot of us are wondering where this goes from here. There's a lot of threats in our industry, public cloud, SaaS application providers. So I'd like to hear from the panel's perspective, where do TSPs fit in?
Arnie, you want to start?
Well, where do TSPs fit in? I mean, where they fit in is you are the heroes. Everything that we've done, every innovation that we've brought to the table is for you, and it's for your business success. And that has always been the case, and that will always be the case. So what's interesting is to see this industry mature the way that it has. And to Michael's point, that's a good thing. You know, you asked me, it's like, what was I doing? My job was to go absolutely, me personally, to take the company as far as I could without any outside influence, as long as I could, right? Because that just made sense. We were able to create community. You know, we were able to do a lot of things and then turn those things profitable so that when money people get involved, it's like, that's already profitable, right? So you don't have to worry about that. So I wanted to get the business to a place where it was super successful and where the roadmap for the future was exactly what the management team of ConnectWise and I wanted to see going into the future. But all of that future and all of our work that we're dedicated to now and into the future is all about technology solution providers and how can we make you more successful. And that includes community, that includes software, that includes labor. And so the more choices that we can give you on how to grow your business and how to be successful, that's what it's all about for us.
Arnie, thank you. And we are incredibly tight on time, so I want to end on time. What I want to do is first thank our panelists.
Thank you.
And I want to thank all of you, and again, I want to thank ConnectWise for having me here again this year. So Arnie, Jason, the entire team, thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it. Panelists, you are now dismissed. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.